Good morning, everybody. I'm going to talk very briefly about open distance learning and how it can be utilised to a greater extent within the Sustainable Development Goals. I think the main thing about the Sustainable Development Goals is they're supposed to be seen as a whole, but I'm going to focus on SDG4, Education for All, just to make the point about how open distance learning can be used to a greater extent. It's quite interesting. Today, the Secretary of State for International Development in the UK is giving evidence to the parliamentary inquiry about the UK's commitment to the Sustainable Development Goals, and we're not quite sure what he will say, because I think it's fair to say that we're not really clear at the moment how seriously the Sustainable Development Goals are being taken as a framework. I think we're all here because we think they're important and we want to see more progress towards them. But I think when one looks at the change that they're making, it's not perhaps as much as we would like, and they feel a bit like the Millennium Development Goals plus, and they feel like they're incremental rather than transformative. So really what I'm going to be talking about is what are the transformations that you can see greater progress by 2030, and how is open distance learning part of that. I'll briefly talk about the Open University where I work. We might not be so well known internationally. In the UK, oh yeah, there we go, thanks. In the UK, we're quite well known because we're 50 years old, and we were first, the idea was developed as the University of the Air by the Prime Minister at the time, who felt that there was a possibility for higher education to reach all parts of the country, to all people, by using radio. That didn't become the name of the university. We were called the Open University, but formed on this idea that higher education could be expanded to anybody, anywhere. And the open means open admissions, which means that anybody can join. Okay, you have to pay some money, it's not so expensive, but open admissions was the central idea of the Open University, and now we're the largest university in the UK by student numbers, and particularly reaching out to people who are in the circumstances where they cannot give up the time to go and study full time. So people who are maybe working, have families, who want to study alongside, and so we like to think, a driver of social mobility in the UK. And certainly most of our students come from backgrounds where, in particular, their parents won't have been to university, or they're from perhaps more disadvantaged backgrounds. And really the Open University in its 50 years has been pioneering this idea of open education, open admissions initially, and then open content has been a big idea. You've heard of many other examples of universities giving away their content for free. And the Open University does this as well. We have a digital platform called Open Learn, where you can read get lots of parts of degree courses for free. And then we also look at something called Open Educational Resources, which is what I'll focus on here. So open education resources are different from just giving away your content. They are giving away your educational content and encouraging people to adapt it and change it and use it. And we're talking here about educational resources mainly that are free to use, free to adapt. You can do what you like with them. There's encouragement to do that. And people talk about the 5 R's. You can keep them for free, you're encouraged to reuse them, you can adapt them to suit your context, you can share them with others, and you can mix them in different ways to create bigger bits of educational content. And this is something the Open University has been really involved in, particularly in Africa and South Asia over the last few years. And I'll talk about some of the projects that we've been doing that explain why we think this is a really effective way of working, and probably an underutilised way of achieving or contributing towards the Sustainable Development Goals. Okay, so the first project I'll talk about is called Tess India, Teacher Education Through School-Based Support, is what Tess stands for in India. It's a project delivered in 7 states. You can see on the map the states that it covered, trying to find a way to support teachers in rural, particularly across all of those states, but particularly ones that were in rural areas, and thinking about how could those teachers, who are often working in very difficult circumstances, get the support that they need. Now, I don't know if anyone is from India here or knows India well, but there is really great educational policies, but actually applying those in practice across the whole of India is something that is not always the case. And actually the support for most teachers is really non-existent. So we were working with the Indian government and saying, how could we create, if you like, almost like a digital support network? So we created over 100 of these open educational resources with teachers or teacher educators in India and teacher educators from the UK, and we designed these resources. The critical thing is they're not resources that are theoretical. They were based on practical examples where we could find teachers who were doing really good stuff already. So, for example, we made a series of videos that show you how to deal with certain circumstances. So it might be how to teach multi-grade classes. You know, if you've got lots of kids of different ages in the same class, how do you solve that problem? What do you do? What's the practical things that you can do? And so rather than make, lecture-based videos or very abstract ideas based on someone who wasn't doing the job, we actually found teachers who were dealing with that problem in real life and were successful at it. And then we made videos, authentic videos, is what we would call them, where a teacher would show what they were doing and talk about it, narration on top. And we found these to be a particularly powerful tool for teachers to use then in their practice to watch and follow. So you can see on the screen there, you can't quite tell, but we made a series of these resources. They could be case studies, videos, there could be lectures as well, some theory, and they're all available in a variety of medium that suits a teacher. So on their phone, low-cost phone, on their tablet, CD-ROM or print, whichever way you want. And the idea isn't that you study it all like a course, but there are particularly open education resources designed for dealing with particular parts of the curriculum or particular parts of problems that teachers experienced. And then become more like catalysts for how do you change your practice rather than I've done a course and now I've forgotten it and I'm going to carry on doing things the same way as always. So they're meant to really support change in practice. The important thing about open education resources is this idea that you can adapt them. And actually we developed these resources in English, then Hindi, and then we realised that that wasn't enough. And actually they've been contextualised, adapted by language, but also in terms of the images used and the cultural references made for each of the 7 states. And we found that this was an essential thing that had to happen. So for this to work really well, you have to have people who want to contextualise it as well. You have to find groups of people who've got the skills to then contextualise, and then the resources can go very far. And we estimate over 1 million teachers have used these resources so far. So that's it's scalable because once you develop the resources, it's quite cost effective to then adapt them if you can find people who want to do that. The next example I'm going to talk about, again, teacher education, is English in Action in Bangladesh. Similar project, but mainly focused on English, teaching English in schools. And this went across the whole of the country in Bangladesh, reaching some 55,000 teachers. And initially, I mean, this project was 10 years long and it's had some real impact in terms of we can see practical changes in teaching, practice and children's learning. At the beginning of the project, I think we imagined we would buy lots of hardware and distribute tablets and phones for everybody. But actually we found, as you see in the top corner, most teachers had a fairly suitable phone, a video-enabled phone, and that was sufficient. So we made all the resources available through an SD card, a memory card, cost about $1 each, and could distribute them for $55,000. You can get these great resources to every teacher in Bangladesh. So, this is why we think there's a really low cost but high quality possibilities here. And this slide is just talking about the practice-based approach. These aren't theoretical things, resources. They're all intended to help you try stuff out and learn as you try. And this is the model, if you like, the pedagogy that's in the resources in this circle. And here's some of the achievements, which I think you can probably, read on the screen for a second. I think what you don't see here is if you look at the icons at the bottom, what this doesn't say is what the baseline was. And so we doubled the number of primary students who could use basic English, and we doubled the number of secondary teachers who could use basic English. Now, in Bangladesh, as in other countries, teachers of English don't necessarily have proficient English skills themselves. So one of the big issues here was to teach teachers English and to help them teach the kids English all at the same time. So these resources were a mix of both. And actually, the benefit of using video is pronunciation is obviously critical for learning a language, and you could have you can do that through videos. Okay, and I think it's sort of I'll whiz through this. There's a growing recognition of what makes I think there's evidence now to show very clearly how to support teachers to improve their practice so that kids can learn. And that's the big issue behind the Sustainable Development Goal 4. And, looking through this model here, which isn't my model, it's come from a rigorous literature review that DFID funded. You can see in the middle, alignment with curriculum. Teachers will generally teach the curriculum is what we found, and open education resources can be used because they can complement the curriculum rather than suggest that it should be replaced. So they can be embedded in a curriculum, which often lacks practical guidance. There is the need for head teacher support to support teachers to teach in effective ways. So again, you can create these open education resources specifically for teachers and specifically for head teachers, not the same resources, but different ones. Teacher peer support is really important. How do teachers work together in groups to support each other and feedback and review? And we found that, again, using very low-cost technologies like WhatsApp groups, teachers were forming these peer support groups in both of those projects to share their lesson that they videoed, feedback to each other, just share questions and answers as they went, which is particularly effective. Follow-on support over time is really important. So rather than take teachers away from the classroom and teach them in lecture theatres, actually through using open education resources, you can pace their learning, and it can be school-based, it can be in the school, they don't have to leave the school. And we found that mobile learning was a particularly effective distribution channel because we found that most teachers have access to a mobile phone that can do the things that it needs to do for them to access open educational resources at low cost. So I think I'll finish there. But just to say that I think there's, across all of the Sustainable Development Goals, I think there's huge scope to look at open education resources to a greater extent. I don't think many people know about them, and probably the critique of them is that they're not very accessible, actually. So if you were to go now and say, that's a great idea, I want to go and find some open education resources, it would not be very easy, and you'd have to look in a variety of different places. I think this is one of the big issues. And there was a World Congress on Open Education Resources 2 years ago in Slovenia, and 20 national governments signed up to the idea of really promoting open education resources. But 20 isn't very many. So I think there's still a lot to do to get this idea to really hold and be used by people beyond places like the Open University and just used in mainstream education. Yeah, thank you.
Okay, thank you very much indeed for presenting in time, and now we open for questions. We open for questions, please. Yes, please.
Good morning, my name's Alan Dean. I run a company called Burning to Learn, and I will underline how difficult it is to get this work into secondary schools, but I'm really impressed with what the Open University is doing. And I found going into youth groups outside schools, I actually filtered into the schools because once you work with the young people, they saw it and they went back in and asked their teachers, what are we doing? So it's a slow burn. If we can find a way to work together, I would love to infect the whole of education. Thank you.
Only to say, look forward to talking later.
Please. Yeah, Miss. Yeah.
Thank you very much. Is it Matt? Yeah. It's excellent talk. I don't think very many people know what the good work Open University does. And like our colleague further, I think everyone's doing loads and loads in health. There's nothing that's really joined up. And I think that this would be a huge opportunity, and I would be very happy to work with you to deliver through that. There's a lot on the internet on health and health courses, a huge number of American universities, European universities, but they are very expensive, right? So they are sold on a particular university's reputation, and it's sold certificate-wise, whether they do you any good or not. But in the end, the experiential part of the learning, which is so important, is not there. And I think the way you've set yours up is very good. And I think you've got a huge amount to offer all of us who are working in this field, actually. You know, they're sort of tying everything up. So thank you.
Well, thank you very much. Yeah, I think you're right. It feels to me, I mean, I used to work for NGOs for a long time, and it feels to me a bit crazy to reflect on the fact that everyone's delivering lots of face-to-face. Oh. Okay. On reflection, we used to do lots of face-to-face training, lots of cascade training, I think. On reflection, why were we doing that? Why didn't we just pool our resources, digitize them, and do this kind of thing, and spend our time coaching and supporting and doing something different rather than transmitting information? It just seems like a very inefficient way to work. So it'd be great to get some big coalitions and think about how to do that.
Okay, please.
Good morning. Thank you for your good speech. My name is Hisham Hassan. I'm a food safety and international food law consultant based in Canada. I have two questions. Distance learning, excuse me, needs some certain infrastructure. And this is a major concern, especially in countries in Africa. So how capable are you to help building infrastructure in countries in Africa? That's the first part of the question. Now, the second part, are you open to partner with universities and institutes in say in Africa to have certain accredited courses? And I'm asking this question because in my field, like the food safety, I really would love to help people back in Africa. So are you capable, or are you open to have partnership with some professors on one side and universities who want those courses to be available online as like modules and have them accredited? Thank you.
So on the first one, yes, I think the infrastructure could be, we often think about there's content, there's support for the student, there's the distribution infrastructure, the IT or whatever you use, or face-to-face, and there's the incentive structure. Why would anyone want to study this? And we look across all four of those to make sure they're all in place. What we tend to do is work with existing systems where we can, so you don't need to build so much infrastructure. So technology that exists already. On these examples I gave, we're working through the education system. So, you know, helping school inspectors or education managers think about their roles differently as facilitators of learning rather than, you know, inspectors. So I think that's part of where it's very expensive to build the whole new infrastructure, but if you often, you know, it's possible to use what's already there and enhance what's there. I think it's part of it. And the second one about, I think that's really interesting about certified courses, or finding what's the right way to incentivize or recognise the learning that's taking place. The examples I've gave, they were just things that were rolled out through the state education system, and people were encouraged to study them because they were useful. But we are getting to the stage now where we look at micro-credentials. You know, how can you study a series of these things and get some credits at the end, and that might add up to something bigger with a recognised university behind it, or maybe the OU plus a partner university. So yes, absolutely, we're open to that second part completely, and we've got quite an extensive network across Africa now of universities that we partner with, and we'd love to talk about that a bit more as well, because I think it's really critical to think about, rather than just going down, well, with lifelong learning, rather than just doing a one-off degree, having the ability to keep topping up one's learning in a recognised, credible way, I think is going to be more and more important.
Yeah, it is very interesting that you talked about this, because my speech is going to be about the food safety culture and how to help people in Sudan, for example, to have a better food safety system. And this is one of the things that I would love to do, is to have some distinguished scientists, like food scientists, to help back in Sudan. And the problem is they can't you can't mobilize them to Africa. So the resolution to that will be having them do a distance learning. So I would love to meet with you sometime and discuss this further. Thank you.
Okay, okay, just 1 minute. Yes, please. Yes.
My question is, you mentioned the resource for are these resources only for English teachers, or do we have for other subjects like mathematics and the rest? My second question: how can these resources help youth who have been badly formed? They have passed out of school, but they want to improve on their defects. Can these resources help them in any way?
The results I showed before, yes, they're just for English teachers. The previous project in India was across all subject areas. That project's not so, it's been going for 3 to 4 years, so we haven't got to a stage yet where we can show with the same rigour of the results, but we know that teachers tell us, and through surveys, that they're changing the way that they teach in line with the principles of the new curriculum. So, yeah, we see good evidence that teachers are changing their practice in India. What we don't see yet is the results. We haven't got the hard evidence of the changes in children's learning yet, which we're assuming will come. In terms of youth, I mean, I think this is a big question, really, is young people often outside the formal education system. So how do you build that support network that means that they don't just access, because most young people that you describe probably haven't, the chance of them learning online before is very low. So they need some support to get started and support to keep learning. And I think this is critical. So if you like, the people infrastructure becomes really important. What's the support network to help them get started and to keep going? And I think it's possible, but it would need a lot of thought about that aspect.
My name is Saif Bashir. I'm a higher education expert. Thank you, Matt, for the excellent presentation. I thought you were going to speak or to talk about the idea of the distance learning in a wider perspective, specifically because I think you are from the Open University, yeah? Because in essence, it's an excellent idea for this distance learning and Open Universities, because it would widen the spectrum for many people to access education. And this example of teachers, educating teachers who would then educate the youngsters in countries like India, Bangladesh, and other, again, it widens access of these children to education. But my question was going to be on a sort of mechanical issue, like in areas, in countries like Middle East countries, there is this culture of they don't trust this idea of distance learning, open universities, because it comes when it comes to the awards or certificates, there's this question: how would the assessor be able to ascertain that this work is being done by X or Y, and so there is always this. I wouldn't say suspicion, but there is this worry that this work might not be done by. Thank you.
Yeah, I think the wider picture, as you say, for higher education is that there just aren't enough universities to meet the demand for higher education around the world. So you think open distance learning has to be part of the picture, but as you said, I was in Jordan recently where universities can only teach a certain amount of their curriculum by open distance learning, and I think it's 20% maximum. And this is the issue. I mean, it's partly for the issues you raise, it just becomes seen as low quality. And so there are a lot of issues to get over, I think, and that's a big discussion, I think. But the Open University now in the UK, it's taken 50 years, but I think if you get an Open University degree in the UK, it's seen as the same as any other university, apart from maybe the top 5 or 6. So I think there's a lot to work on there around some of the issues, to overcome some of those issues. But if they can be overcome, then that's huge potential.
Well, well done, and we appreciate your comments. I come from a situation where many young people from the surrounding villages and towns have come to Maiduguri for safety. Their education is completely disrupted. And as an educator, when we meet such people in the IDPs camps, it becomes very sorrowful. How do we, maybe I better talk to you after the, what are your recommendations in terms of how to reach some, particularly secondary school students that would like to continue with their learning, but they are completely disrupted from, taken away from their homes, and they are just simply there just to survive. Thank you.
Yeah, I don't have an easy answer, but I think there's possibilities here to think about how open distance learning could certainly help in those situations, because I think in most displacements, education is the last issue that gets addressed, if at all. And that's a massive problem. So it's got to be possible, I think, to think about how digital education can support students in those circumstances. And so I'm very happy to talk afterwards about that.
Okay, if I comment on this, actually, I have the experience to supervise distant students, especially for postgraduate. Besides the facilities, the most important factors, the student and the supervisor. If the supervisor has good skills to guide the student and the student has good experience, especially those who are working for a long time. I have supervised some students from Nigeria, from Zambia, from Iraq, from totally different countries. They come out with PhD and DBA thesis better than those on campus, frankly speaking. So the success of this type of distance learning is based on the human resources, the student and the facilitator, not only the technology. Because we have a problem even on campus. I have been teaching for 15 years. No any student asks question on campus. And we have the facility of a multimedia learning system online. We upload all the documents. And we have the blended learning, which is class and online teaching. But still there is no significant impact on understanding of the student who are in the class. So imagine if you have no face-to-face communication, how to overcome the problems. So to me, according to my experience, if you have good facilitators, they know how to guide, and you have good students, they know how to walk, distance learning is very good. Yes, please.
I simply wanted to make one point. It does happen in camps, right? And a very good example is the camps in Syria. For those masses and masses of people were displaced, there's quite a lot of teaching going on from children coming in preschool to school. All those places in the Middle East were highly educated with great literacy. So the people in the camps with skills, what they need is empowerment and a bit of resource to support them. And I think, as you said, it's on a case-by-case basis, because if you do look around the Middle East, the people are teaching in camps.
So please remember, if we all help and do a little bit, it will make a big difference.